Mississippi State football 1980 was a dramatic turnaround from the preceding year. How did this happen? A good question that has a multitude of answers. Following a highly successful recruiting campaign, Coach Emory Ballard and the staff went to work on the 1980 season. There was a spring training period filled with fundamental work. Learning a new formation, the wing bone that had been devised by the Bulldogs' head mentor. Then came the long, hot summer. Two-a-day drills, more commitments for coaches and players, and tons of work. After the disappointing 1979 season, head coach Emory Ballard had said, "We are going to have a winning football team at Mississippi State, and you can put that in your papers." The writers did just that, perhaps without an inkling that Ballard and his dogs would deliver right out of the chute. Which brings us to September 6th, the season opener. Just as it would end in a bowl, it would begin. Liberty Bowl, Memorial Stadium, Memphis. How appropriate that Mississippi State would begin its success story along the banks of that grand old river which bears its state name. It was Mississippi State 34, Memphis State 7. The Bulldogs won and made it look impressive, and a bucketful smoother than a lot of folks had thought. And it was no secret the Bulldogs planned for wingback Marty McDowell to get his hands on the ball often. It took just one offensive play to show how. Junior quarterback Robbie Mink gave the senior McDowell the ball around right end. With excellent blocking, McDowell scampered for 22 yards. In a way, it set the tone for a season. So too did the MSU defensive unit give a warning of things to come in 1980. Memphis State gained absolutely nothing rushing. Robbie Mink quarterbacked the Bulldogs to a 12-0 halftime lead. A young freshman quarterback wearing number 13, John Bond, made his debut in the second half and engineered two more touchdown drives. Memphis State scored only once, and that after a Bulldog fumble. The Tigers' lone touchdown cut the Bulldog lead, 12-7 in the third period. Mississippi State quickly went 80 yards to end what little suspense there had been. For his part, McDowell ran for 61 yards, caught passes for 53 yards, and returned a punt 55 for a touchdown. Not a bad evening's work. As a team, State outgained the Tigers 393-136. It was, in more ways than one, a new beginning. Game 2 brought Louisiana Tech to the Starkville campus for one of the two games scheduled on Scott Field. Louisiana Tech, playing under Columbus native Billy Brewer for the first time, played hard and actually led once early in the game. But the Louisiana Bulldogs came up on the short end of the 31-11 score. The game was more one-sided than the score. Mississippi State's Bulldogs plowed around and through Louisiana Tech for 500 yards total offense, 385 of that on the ground. Bond passed and ran for 203 yards. Michael Haddix ran for another 117. State's defense limited Louisiana Tech to a scant 34 yards rushing. Meanwhile, the Louisiana Tech defense was no match for the State offensive line, which took control of the game early. Collectively, they have been given the name of the Bulldozers. and you had better believe the new name was appropriate. When State needed tough yardage, these guys paved the way. Individually, number 63, Matt Edwards. Alan Massey, number 71. Offensive center, Kent Hall, number 58. Number 77, Roman Grace. Number 74, Wayne Harris. Tight end, Jerry Price, number 82. There probably wasn't a more consistent group in the country in 1980. Later in the season, a sports writer would ask Marty McDowell, how do you go about averaging 8 yards per rush? McDowell would smile and say, with our line, it's easy. You get the ball and start to run, and there's nobody out there to tackle you. Against Louisiana Tech, the Bulldozers did indeed do their work well. And so the Bulldogs were 2 wins, no losses, and ready to begin Southeastern Conference play. Vanderbilt was next in Music City, USA. In Nashville, stars arrive every day, many hoping one day to make it big in the films. They could have made a highlight film of Michael Haddix in the first quarter alone. Haddix, running with a stunning combination of power and speed, rushed for 95 yards in the first 15 minutes of the game and would end up with 144 for the night. On State's second possession, Haddix had 2 13-yard scampers and then a 39-yard thing of beauty when he executed a 360-degree whirl that left one Vanderbilt cornerback searching for an autograph of the new star who had arrived for a one-night stand at Commodore Field. Mississippi State led 10-0 after 1 quarter and seemed en route to an easy victory. Vanderbilt had some other ideas. I thought we played harder and tougher than at any other time since I've been here, Vandy coach George McIntyre would later say. The Commodores played hard and tough enough to take the Bulldog to the limit. State led 10-7 in intermission, then 17-7 midway through the fourth quarter, before Vanderbilt hooked up on a 39-scoring pass that cut the lead 17-14. Then the State offense again asserted itself, like 72 yards in 12 plays for a TD that produced the victory, 24-14. Appropriately, it was Haddix, spelled with 2 Ds, who scored the last touchdown for 6 yards, capping a 144-yard night. That made it 3-0 for the Bulldogs. It had taken Ballard's team just 3 games to equal its win total for the previous year. However, Florida, another improved team, was next on the schedule, and at Gainesville in September. Mississippi State and Florida have had some real shootouts through the years, and this one wouldn't be any different. With the temperature soaring around the 100 mark on the AstroTurf and injuries taking a toll for the first time in the season, the Bulldogs dropped a heartbreaker 21-15. Little did anyone suspect at the time those 6 points would keep the Bulldogs out of the Sugar Bowl on New Year's Day. And despite injuries to Glenn Collins, Mike McInerney, and Ernie Barnes, the Bulldogs came so close, oh so close. Trailing 7-0 in the first half, Mississippi State drove down to the Florida 2-yard line, where on 4th down, Bond was stopped while trying to throw. Had State gotten those 72 inches, the Crescent City, where that grand old river empties into the Gulf of Mexico, would have been maroon and white on New Year's Day. The Bulldogs didn't score there, but they didn't die there either. Even when Florida built a 21-7 lead, State battled back. John Bond completed 11 of 25 passes, good for 146 yards, including a long touchdown aerial to number 18, James Otis Doss, the tight end. Bond's fellow freshman, George Wansley, who caught 5 of those passes, scored a touchdown and a 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter to bring the Bulldogs to within 21-15. However, when State finally got the ball back, only seconds remained. The Bulldogs lost, but they felt like they had just run out of time. So the Bulldogs packed in their 3-1 record and headed for Champaign, Illinois, to face Illinois and a young man by the name of Dave Wilson, the fastest gun in the Big Ten Conference. Despite Wilson completing 23 of 41 passes for 283 yards, Mississippi State won 28-21. Later in the season, Emory Bellard would say, "I was pretty upset at the time that he passes for 283 yards on us. Now I feel like we held him to 283 yards." That was after Mr. Wilson had passed for 621 yards against no lesser a foe than Ohio State. While Wilson and his mates got most of their yardage in the air, the Bulldogs did it their way, on the ground, amassing 276 yards rushing. The game marked the emergence of a healthy, hard-charging fullback, Donald Ray King. King, who would eventually gain 642 yards on the season, went up the middle for 94 yards on 18 carries against the Illini. Bond raced for 81 more, and the Bulldogs got solid relief efforts from freshman George Wansley and freshman Danny Knight. For Mississippi State, depth had never been more important. While State had played catch-up the week before, they had to play stay-ahead against Illinois. The Bulldogs built a 28-7 lead, then looked down the barrel of rifle-armed Dave Wilson and company. Wilson guided the Illini to 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns, but the hustling State defense preserved the 28-21 victory and ran the record to 4 wins against 1 loss. Which brings us to homecoming, in a game the Bulldog fans would rather forget, but a game the Bulldog players and coaches would not forget. Southern Mississippi was the opponent that let the dog out of the cage. "I'm embarrassed," said Emory Bellard after the 42-14 defeat. His Bulldogs were too. Not that Southern didn't have a good football team. The Golden Eagles came riding into Starkville with a 5-win, no-loss slate, with impressive wins over Tulane and Ole Miss. Southern's Reggie Collier ran for 86 yards and passed for 72 more. And about the only happy MSU alumnus at homecoming was Southern Mississippi head coach Bobby Collins, a former state captain and quarterback. Mississippi State was missing 3 of 4 regulars in the defensive line and hurt itself with 3 turnovers, but Bellard refused to use excuses. "We just didn't do much of anything right," he would say. Oh, there were a couple of MSU bright spots. King rushed for 94 yards. McDowell eluded about half of the swarming Golden Eagle defense on one 62-yard touchdown run. The Bulldozers, as usual, opened some big holes, especially during the second half. But for the most part, this was a disappointing afternoon. Happily, however, Mississippi State honored its finest football team in the school's history, the 1940 losses. Remember that, a 9-2 record. Proving once and for all that good can indeed come from bad, State regrouped. The Southern Mississippi loss had occurred on October 11th. On October 12th, the Bulldogs made a commitment. They declared a new 5-game season. They decided right then and there to win all 5 of those games. The fact that Miami, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, and Ole Miss were those 5 opponents didn't matter. Miami, a nationally ranked team that would go on to win the Peach Bowl, was first on the list in the Orange Bowl. The Hurricanes went into the game with what was statistically the nation's 3rd best defense. But afterward, one had to wonder, if the Miami defense is 3rd best, where at the top of the ladder does the Mississippi State offense belong? State gained 404 yards in a thrilling offensive explosion for a 34-31 victory. Ain't it nice, a happy Emory Bellard said. Was it ever? The Bulldogs had gone from a struggling 4-2 mark to a strong 5-win, 2-loss record and back in the bowl picture. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't supposed to be. Before the game, Miami had been giving up only 77 yards per game rushing. Against the Bulldogs, Miami allowed 107 to Donald Ray King, 81 to Michael Haddix, and 92 to John Bond, who also turned in a 69-yard touchdown run, erased by a penalty. Dana Moore, who had kicked crucial field goals in the 3 straight victories, hit a 37-yarder for the winning points early in the fourth quarter. The Bulldog defense had another day in the sun, too. Johnny Cook scored a touchdown on a pass interception. And the defense demonstrated the first of 3 straight goal line stands that would win 3 consecutive football games. When Miami moved to a 1st and goal position at the State 4, the defense, the entire defense did its job. It had been a time to put up or shut up, and the Bulldogs had put up. The Auburn Tigers and a Major League running back named James Brooks was next. The Bulldogs beat Auburn. We're not sure about Brooks, who rushed for 159 yards. What we are sure of is that when the Bulldogs were leading 24-21 in the fourth quarter, the Bulldogs kept Brooks out of the end zone on a 4th down play at the 6-inch line. Brooks made 159 yards, but the Bulldog defense wouldn't let him make 6 inches when it mattered the most. It was another play where the season could have been made or broken, and again the Bulldogs put up. I wanted to jump over the line. They wouldn't let me. Brooks was quoted in the dressing room following the game. They hit me in the backfield before I got started. They were number 36, Willie Jackson, Rob Fessmeyer, number 6, number 83, Jerry Gilligan, number 99, Johnny Cooks, and Don Edwards, number 93, all of whom got a piece of Brooks. While Auburn depended almost wholly on the running of Brooks, Mississippi State spread the wealth around. King rushed for 81 yards, and McDowell got 78 more. McDowell scored the game-winning touchdown on a 19-yard reverse run in the fourth quarter. Now the state record was 6 wins and 2 losses, and the Bulldogs had 6 days to prepare for Alabama, the nation's top-ranked team, the best football team this country had to offer. Mississippi State fired the shot heard around the football world. Mississippi State 6, Alabama 3. Mississippi State not only scored more points than Alabama, the Bulldogs beat the Crimson Tide in every facet of football. No less an authority than Paul Bear Bryant called the state victory decisive and strolled to the south end of Mississippi Memorial Stadium to personally tell the Bulldogs that. Mississippi State totaled 17 first downs and 241 yards offense compared to 11 first downs and 180 yards for an Alabama team that had been averaging 425 yards per game. Emory Bellard, the man who invented the wishbone offense, had designed a defense to shut it down. And the defense did. In a wild Mississippi State dressing room, Bellard told newsmen, "We played from the ground up, start to finish, and never once let up. This is a great bunch here who decided they wanted to be something better than average. I'm proud for them, and I'm proud for everybody who loves Mississippi State." Alabama led 3-0 at the halftime thanks to a 49-yard field goal by Peter Kim on the last play of the half. Dana Moore tied it for the Bulldogs with a 37-yard field goal early in the third period. And then put the Mississippi State Bulldogs ahead of Alabama 6-3 with a 22-yarder early in the fourth quarter. But Alabama, which seldom dies, didn't die easy this time. The Crimson Tide launched a last-minute drive to the Bulldog 4-yard line. From there, with the seconds ticking away, Alabama went with its strength. Wishbone, triple option right. Quarterback Don Jacobs never had a chance. Big Tyrone Keys pounded him. Billy Jackson, who recovered the fumble, was named the National Lineman of the Week for his outstanding defensive performance against the Crimson Tide. Mississippi State had won a great football victory. Perhaps, just perhaps, its greatest ever. And Alabama had been beaten for the first time in 28 games, for the first time in 26 Southeastern Conference games, and for the first time by Mississippi State in 23 years. It was, to be sure, an afternoon a lot of people will remember for a long, long time. After 2 weeks of some real serious celebrating, State had another game to play. What the Bulldogs had to do against the LSU Tigers was avoid a letdown and show the fans around the nation and the several bold scouts in the Mississippi Memorial Stadium that beating Alabama was no fluke. Although Bulldog football was not shown on network television during the season, a national audience saw this game presented on ESPN. What they saw was indeed impressive. Where the Alabama win had been a defensive masterpiece, the LSU game was an offensive track meet. Mississippi State got out of the blocks fast for a 14-0 lead. On the Bulldogs' first play, very first play from scrimmage, John Bond hit senior split end David Ellis across the middle with a long touchdown pass. LSU, which was to finish the season with 7 wins and only 4 losses, and a team capable of beating anyone, fought back to a 24-24 halftime standoff. And the Tigers, it seemed, had momentum on their side. Then it happened. Glenn Young gathered in the second half kickoff in the end zone and ran it to their end zone. 100 yards for the go-ahead score. That opened the floodgates. The defense set up the next score with a fumble recovery. And then Bond hit McDowell with a 69-yard pass, and it was 45-24. The Bulldogs weren't through either. Before this cold, rainy afternoon had ended, Mississippi State racked up 327 yards rushing, 142 yards passing, and 55 points in a convincing 55-31 win. Haddix rushed for 95 yards. King had another fine day with 68. Bond, showing more and more maturity, hit 6 of 9 throws for 163 yards and operated the triple option play just the way Emory Bellard had designed it. In many ways, the 55-31 victory was the most impressive victory of the season. After all, not since way back in 1914, 66 years ago, had a team scored so many points against proud LSU. It was one of the most decisive defeats a Tiger team had ever suffered. As impressed as anyone were the Sun Bowl scouts, who after the game issued the Bulldogs an invitation, which was quickly and most enthusiastically accepted in the locker room. Next stop, Juarez. But first, there was the traditional game with Ole Miss remaining on the schedule. Many in the news media billed this one as a battle of quarterbacks. The freshman John Bond of the Bulldogs against John Forcade, the experienced Rebel leader who was the total offense champ in the SEC. That being the case, it was no contest. The statistics tell the story. Bond ran for 163 yards, passed for 151, and was named Sports Illustrated's Offensive Player of the Week. Forcade lost yardage rushing and hit only 15 of 32 passes for 129 yards, but most importantly, 4 of Forcade's passes were intercepted by the alert Mississippi State Bulldogs. It was an historic game. 62,520 fans, the most ever to see a sporting event in the state, piled into the Mississippi Memorial Stadium for the contest. State took an early lead and led 13-7 going into the fourth quarter before the Rebels scored and went in front 14-13. That lead was to last less than 60 seconds. State on their next possession simply went 64 yards in only 3 plays to put the game-winning points on the scoreboard. The first play lost a yard, but then Glenn Young, who had been a hero the week before, caught a short pass from John Bond and turned it into a big gainer, streaking down to the Ole Miss 10-yard line. From there, Bond pitched to Haddix, who bowled over the Rebels for the score. Ole Miss tried to come back on their aerial game, but couldn't move past midfield as the Bulldog pass rush and pass defense held them at bay. The game ended with a 19-14 Bulldog victory, with Bulldog freshman Billy Jackson sacking Forcade for a huge loss on the final play of the game. Statistically, the game had been much more one-sided than the score. State piled up 473 yards total offense to 304 for the Rebels. Donald Ray King got 100 yards, mostly right up the heart of the Ole Miss defense. And while we're on statistics, let it be noted that the 1980 Bulldogs gained more yardage, both rushing and total offense, than any team in Mississippi State history. Using the new wing bone, Mississippi State amassed nearly 400 yards per game total offense and nearly 300 per game rushing alone. The Bulldogs went on to play tradition-rich and powerful Nebraska in the Sun Bowl. After 4 days of sunshine, banquets and parties, Juarez and the rest, the Bulldogs came up on the short end of a 31-17 score that did little to dull the luster of one of Mississippi State's finest seasons. 18 seniors were a part of this record-breaking group, 18 guys who had stuck together through the thick and thin, a group of guys who etched their names forever in Mississippi State legend. Emory Ballard probably put it best when he said, "These are a group of guys who got together and made a commitment to be better than average." In 1980, the Mississippi State Bulldogs were a lot better than average. They put up.